to the budget, obviously. They are things that we wouldn't be talking about if the budget weren't what it is. That said, the two are still separate even within the budget. And I'll show you as we go through this what that means. And that's why I put this together. So once you get past here, we'll take a look at what the budgeting process looks like in the district. And everybody can hear me okay? How about over here? Can you hear me all right? Good deal. And can you see that all right?
Yep.
Back there? So our budgeting process looks like this. School districts across the state of Michigan are required by law to have their budgets approved by their boards of education by July 1 of each fiscal year. So coming up in July, actually the board will do it before June 30th. So prior to June 30th, the board will have approved its budget for next year. The majority of the school funding is based on the per pupil foundation allowance. The state of Michigan decides, through a rather drawn out and complicated process, how much money we're going to get for each student that goes here to our school district. That's where the bulk of our money comes from. The rest of our money comes from things called categoricals. Those are typically federal programs that have names like Title I, Title IIA, Title VI. Categoricals are dollars that we get that we can only spend on specific items. For example, Title I funds, we have to submit a plan and we can only spend Title I money on academic pursuits that are outlined and approved in that plan. Just to give you some example of how it works with federal money. But the bulk of our money comes from, come on in Vicki, you haven't missed a thing. The bulk of our money comes from that per pupil allowance that the state gives us, which is about $7,100 is what we're planning for next year. We won't know what our per pupil enrollment is until sometime in late October when we have our count day. And the count day is actually comprised of two dates, one in February and one in October. And the two are reconciled using a formula that the state provides. And at the end of that, we receive funding for how many kids we have. So count day happens twice a year. A lot of people think it just happens in October and that's how much money you get. That's not true. It happens twice. There's a formula that weights each of them. And we receive our money from that, ultimately from that count. We won't know that count until October, that first count.
That day?
Oh yeah, well that's cool that day. You bet on that.
In February did we have school?
Oh yeah.
Count day?
Yeah, we were good to go. So where are we at right now? Well, as of the close of business today, the state has not yet approved the school aid package, which will have in it the amount of money that we are going to get per student. So we don't know how much money we're going to get per student next year. Now, I follow all the stuff that's floating around out there, you know, that they send you, telling you this is what they think it's going to be, or we think it's going to be that, or we think it's going to be this, and the governor has his proposal, the House has theirs, the Senate has theirs, and all three of those proposals are out there just waiting to come together and become one final proposal. That hasn't happened yet. When it does, we'll receive notice that the school aid package is set, and this is how much money you're going to get per student. Right now, we are guessing, and it's a pretty good guess, that we're going to get about $100 to $112 more per student next year than what we're getting this year. Just to give you some idea of what we think is coming down the pipe. So, because of the timeline and the legislative uncertainty, most of what I do when I'm developing a budget to ultimately share with all of you and the board is based on assumptions, things that I think are going to happen. Now, I've been doing this for 9 years, so I've gotten pretty good at putting together a budget based on those assumptions that ends up being pretty accurate. So at the end of the day, what we've got, what we're putting together right here, is pretty close to what I think is going to happen, and my track record is such that I'm probably going to be in the ballpark. The part that I can be off on is the enrollment. Because right now I have to base enrollment on what it is today, what the live birth rate was 5 or 6 years ago, because those kids are coming into kindergarten now, or should be if they didn't move away. So there's a lot of guesswork involved in what enrollment is ultimately going to look like. So that all said, those are the major assumptions that go into building a school budget. So if you're sitting in your seat right now and you're thinking, well, it sounds like you pretty much just guess. Yeah, there's a lot of guesswork involved in what the school budget looks like. And that's why I always tell people, just because we're having discussions about making reductions today does not necessarily mean that when we start school in September that those reductions are going to still be there. If enrollment were to jump dramatically above what I had predicted, we'll have more money and some of those reductions may not have to be made. On the other hand, the opposite could be true. If we get to the first couple weeks of school and I call all the secretaries, Kim, you know this, Karen, you know this, I call all the secretaries, the first thing I ask the first week of school is how many kids are here? If they say, you know, oh my gosh, Rick, we're down 100 kids. I've got a major problem. And we start looking at maybe we didn't make enough reductions last spring when we put the budget together. So there's some guesswork involved. And during these tough economic times, the numbers of kids that are coming in and going out is big. It sways our budget in a major direction both ways. So we have to be aware that that is out there as well. Now Gladwin is lucky. Because we've done so well academically, our schools of choice numbers are very high. This year we have over 200 students that come to Gladwin Community Schools that don't live in our school district. So with those kids coming in here schools of choice, they pump up our numbers and ultimately result in us having a much larger chunk of change coming than what we would otherwise. And that's a direct result of everybody's hard work in making sure that the kids continue to learn.
Just a quick question.
Absolutely.
Was kindergarten roundup fairly okay?
It was average. Yeah, it was average. We're watching it very closely. We didn't hit it out of the park, so to speak, but it wasn't, for Kent, it wasn't a gutter ball either. Okay?
Do you know how many there were?
Wow.
Do you have a number, Rick?
Had to bring it back with you, Ken.
What?
Yeah, had to bring it back.
Do you have a number of how many there were?
Number of who?
Did they tell you how many there were?
Not yet, no. I usually wait until Marcine's finished with everything and then I get a look at it because they can everything come out. And then we also have summer roundup, which typically picks up a few, 15 to 20 also. So we'll see.
I have a question. Is
Shoot.
this new age thing on the kindergarten going to affect it?
Yeah.
What do they?
They have to be five at a certain...
Yep, it definitely will impact enrollment. But we've got some things in place that we're trying to kind of buffer that a little bit, but it's going to make a difference.
Backing that up every year, what, 6 months?
Yep.
Throughout the course of 5 years, something like that.
They want kids starting kindergarten a little bit later. When I say they, I mean our legislative body. So,
Do the preschoolers count?
no.
Even though they're in the school?
Right.
It's like they just kind of run that rule, I'd say.
Kind
Are
of.
they federal?
Yes, some of it is, and some of it's state preschool money that we get that funds those programs. But again, that would be in a form of categorical type funding that we couldn't spend on other things. We've got to use it right there. The per pupil allowance that we get, that $7,000, whatever number of dollars that we get per kid, we can use that on whatever we want. That's a good question. All right, so here's the major budgeting assumptions that I have made putting together the budget that I'm going to show you in just a couple of minutes. Right now, our current enrollment is about 52 students lower than the same time last year. That's a loss of about $360,000, but I think some of those are going to come back in the fall. So I'm going to say that about 12 of those kids are going to re-enroll for fall. I hope I'm right. And if that's the case, we're going to be 40 students down in the fall than what we were this year. If that plays out, you can do the math at $7,000 a piece and see that it's about $300,000 that we're going to lose from students not being in the district that once were. Either we graduate more than come in kindergarten, or kids move away. And both of those phenomena are happening right now in schools all across the state of Michigan. So although the state hasn't yet finalized the school aid package, we're anticipating an increase of approximately $100 per pupil for next year. So we're going to get a little more money from the state, I think. Categorical funding that I talked about earlier, that's not going to change. We're pretty confident that's going to stay the same. We're going to see about a 3% increase in our healthcare costs. Our labor costs, and remember, schools are labor-intensive organizations. You know, most of what we spend money on is labor. Our labor costs are going to increase based on our current contractual obligations. And then there'll be a normal inflationary cost to non-labor related line items. Fuel in the buses, the heat and lights in the buildings, those types of things are costs that are non-labor related, but they go up every year just like they do at home. And we have to deal with those increases. So those are our major budgeting assumptions. Anybody got any questions on those? All right, moving right along. So what do the numbers look like for 2014, 2015? Well, based on those budgeting assumptions that I just talked about, we're going to be almost $500,000 in the hole, all things considered, for next year. So we have a pretty significant deficit out there, and this is called a structural deficit. We have a pretty significant structural deficit out there that we're facing for next year if we don't make some changes. And I broke it down real quick for you, and these are all estimated numbers. I round them. I don't give you, $74.62 on these. These are rounded numbers. Loss of 40 kids, contractual labor costs, healthcare increases, and inflation of non-labor related. You can add that up, and it comes out to almost $500,000. So that gives you some idea of what the board is looking at, and as I build a budget, what I'm talking about for next year. Now, what you won't notice in here are any transportation costs, and I know a lot of you bus drivers, that's something that's probably in your mind right now. You said you had to buy buses. Well, I have not purchased in this budget. There are no bus purchases in this budget. And a new bus at about $80,000 to $85,000. The used buses that we've been able to purchase running in the high 60s, low 70s for a really nice used bus, you can get some idea of what it would cost to replace 4 of those buses and what that would do to the budget. This gives you a look at the budget over time, and it starts over there at 2009, 2010. Blue is revenue, red are expenditures. Ideally, your revenue and your expenditures would be even, or your revenues would be slightly above your expenditures. Just like at home, you don't want to spend more money than you earn. The school operates the same way. If you'll notice in 2011, 2012, the district spent in deficit, meaning we spent more money than what we took in. And we did that intentionally because we had 2 major curriculum purchases that we needed to make in order to help the kids learn better at the elementary and intermediate school. That was our Math and Focus curriculum purchase and our writing curriculum, our new writing curriculum. And those were major purchases that cost a lot of money, and that's why you see we spent more than we took in. Now, we were in a very good position at that point in time because the district had built a fund balance. The fund balance is a savings account. And the district had put money in a savings account specifically for things like that. If we need something that we aren't taking in enough money to buy, we can draw from our savings account to purchase that item. And that's what we did for those curriculum purchases. If you look at 2012, 2013, that was last year's budget, that ran for all practical purposes even. Our revenues and our expenditures were equal. There's a difference of probably $14,000, I think, between the two, which is, in a budget our size, it's for all practical purposes balanced. So that budget you see in 12-13 isn't bad. We would like to see it run that way. Our estimate for this year, when we finish it up on our audited, you can see we're going to spend more this year than what we took in as well. So the board's kind of on the edge right now of where it should be with its spending. It's spending more than it's taking in, but not grossly more. Okay, the grossly more in 2011, 2012 was intentional, and not something that's likely to be repeated, we hope. But you can see that we're right on the cusp. We can't certainly afford a $500,000 deficit next year. So the numbers, they tell us that 2 of the past 3 years, our expenditures have substantially exceeded our revenue. And although they were planned expenditures, we can't continue to deficit spend. The continuation of deficit spending would be irresponsible. Just like at home, you can't continue to spend more than you take in. Even though you have a savings account, pretty soon you've depleted your savings account and you're in real trouble. The district got there about 10 years ago or 11 years ago. The district got itself in that situation where it had deficit spend for so many years and at such a rate that it depleted its savings account and went bankrupt. And you all lived through the days when we made those massive reductions in staff. We laid off 31 support staff. We laid off 22 teachers, and the next year we laid off 14 more support staff and a couple more teachers. So massive structural changes to the way the district operated is what it took to fix the problem that had occurred over time. What I'm saying and what I say to the board is it's my job to not let that happen again. Our current fund balance is at 15% of revenue, and our district is in excellent financial condition, but reductions in expenditures are necessary if we're to remain on solid financial footing. So we're in good shape. But if we're going to stay in good shape, we've got to make some changes when our revenue drops as drastically as it's anticipated to drop next year. So this is a question I get asked a lot. If we're in great financial shape, why are we cutting the budget? Well, the measure of a school district's financial health is based upon 2 basic parameters. One, the district has a healthy 10 to 15% fund balance. Depending on who you ask, that can vary between 10 and 20% of what is healthy. The state of Michigan would like it to be on the heavy side. The MASB, the Michigan Association of School Boards, recommends that it's 20%. I put 10 to 15 because I'm comfortable with 10 to 15, especially in these economic times. The district is not showing a pattern of or a large instance of deficit spending that runs the risk of depleting the fund balance. So if you look at those 2 parameters that schools are judged on as far as their financial health, we are healthy right now. If we deficit spend at the level that we would need to balance the budget without any budget reductions next year, we would violate both of those parameters and we would be in financial trouble. When the district went bankrupt before, it took 3 years. They were very healthy financially, and the district blew through about $2.8 million in 3 years and went broke. That's how fast it happens. Obviously, if you're looking at a $500,000 deficit, as we are for next year, it wouldn't take long to blow through our $2 million fund balance. 4 years is what it would take if we don't fix this problem. So we're not reducing the budget to correct a financial problem. We don't have a financial problem. We're reducing the budget to prevent a financial problem. And there's a big difference between those two. And that's the point that I want to stress with everyone that I talk to about this, is we aren't in a financial bind. We will be if we don't address it. But right now we're not. This shows you what the school district's expenditures look like. So you can see that our salaries and wages are 51% of all the money we take in. 51% of it gets spent on people. Fringe benefits is 31%. Again, wages and benefits. So 82% of the district's entire budget is spent paying us our wages and benefits. And I say us because I am one of those people too. So we all take up and consume 81% of the school district's budget, which then leaves the remainder of the budget, or 82% rather, which means there's 18% of the budget left over for everything else that we do. Well, then everything else is a lot, but it's the smallest part of our budget, because most of our budget is in people. And schools are labor-intensive organizations. 82% is right about where that should be. I'm more comfortable at 80% than I am at 82, but that's not catastrophic. That's not huge. To give you some idea what huge is, when the board made its budget reductions 8 and 9 years ago, the drastic reductions that I just talked about earlier, we were at 91% wages and benefits. So 91% of our budget was being consumed by people's wages and benefits. So that's why we had such a crazy right-sizing of the district at that point in time. We're not there now. Okay, that's why I say we are in very good financial shape. We don't have a problem, we're preventing a problem. And that illustrates it pretty well. So when the board has to reduce its budget, it has three basic choices that it can look at. Three basic menu items, if you will. They can reduce the number of people that work in the district, because remember, 81 or 82% rather of the budget is people. The rest of it, that small piece, there's nothing there to reduce. You can't save enough copy paper. You can't turn the heat down enough to make up the deficit that we have to make up in that 18% of the budget that is non-staff related. So if you're going to solve a problem of $500,000, it's going to be solved in that 82%. So they can reduce the number of employees that we have, or we can reduce the wages and benefits of the employees that we have, or we can do both of those. And how much you do of each just depends on what you're able to work out with the board and with the people, the labor groups that are out there in the district. All right, any questions at this point? I know I'm saying a lot and I'm moving kind of fast, but I want to give some background here so people understand what's going on. All right, no questions? I'll keep clicking. So the board has had a philosophy, and I have shared this philosophy. We believe that we need to keep these budget reductions as far away from the students and the student programs as possible. We need to keep them away from the kids. Why? Lots of different reasons. Our mission here is education. That's what we do. You know, Gladwin Community Schools is an educational institution. We provide an education to kids. That's what we do. That's our number one job. And we've done a very good job of doing that, as has been evidenced by our students' performance. The other reason is we live in a climate of schools and choice. Remember I told you that we have over 200 kids that choose to come here? As soon as we start cutting those programs, like all the other districts around us have had to do, as soon as we start whacking those programs, whatever they might be, put a name to them, you know, drop the choir, drop art, drop band, drop sports, drop whatever you want to throw out there, parents will take their kids someplace where those things are offered. Because quite frankly, what's important to parents? We'd like to think the number one most important thing is an academic education. And I would like to think and hope that it is. But don't let that fool you for 1 minute, that athletics and extracurriculars aren't a huge part of what parents expect from their schools either, which is great. I want my kid to have those things too. So if we start cutting those programs that we offer students, whether they be academic or extracurricular, we start losing schools of choice kids, we start losing a portion of those 200 kids, we run into real big trouble fast. Our deficit that we're trying to solve can get much bigger based on the cuts that we've made. So we can actually contribute to our problem by making the wrong cuts. Do you follow that? Okay. So the board has a philosophy of maintaining programs and services that most closely impact the students, and that's been their number one priority. Now that's not to say that the proposed budget reductions I'm going to talk about are not going to have an impact on the district. They will. You can't cut things out of the budget and not have an impact. It's going to have an impact. The trick is to have the least impact as possible on instruction, our core mission. So that's what the board has to try to do when they go through this process. So the board has to work with that menu and that philosophy to come up with what it's going to do with its budget. Making sense? It's not fun, but it is the process that we go through. All right, so here are the budget proposals that are out there right now, and this is what I'm talking to the board about, and this is what is driving the board this evening to approve making some staff reductions. If you look on the left column there, you can see all the different line items, and there are dozens of line items that are sub-line items to each of those, but these are the major ones and the dollars that are in them. So if you look at the top, you can see the revenue, the current budget, you can see how much money we're bringing in. Next year, you can see the proposed budget number 1 with no reductions. If we left everything that we currently have just the way it is under proposed budget number 1, that's what next year would look like. And you can see it shows about a $455,582 deficit. Proposed budget number 2 has the reductions that I'm proposing that the board made. And you can see that that will result in a $91,507 surplus budget. So Vicki asked a good question today, and she said, well, if you're going to have extra money, why do you need to make some of the cuts that you're going to make? Well, that $91,000 represents 1/2 of 1% of our entire budget. So when I'm building a budget, $90,000, $100,000 comes and goes literally in the blink of an eye. So even though I may build the best budget in the world, it could change way more than $91,000 over the course of time, over the course of the year. And let me give you an example of how that can happen. If I were to run that budget this year, well, I'll pick on our current year budget. Our current year budget is right now, you can see, anticipated to be $12,000 in the red, which isn't bad. For all practical purposes, a balanced budget at the end of the year. But not a horrible thing. Now you can see there's a receivable for the scoreboards because the Gladwin Athletic Association is giving us money to pay for the scoreboards that we put up. They're getting donations to pay for those, so that money is coming back into the budget, which is a good thing. So this year in March, we were anticipating having about $114,000 more in our budget this year than what we ended up with. What happened was in March we got a phone call from the Department of Education alerting us to the fact that they were changing our Title I dollars that we received, and they were not going to allow us to spend $98,000 of that Title I budget where we had anticipated spending it. So we lost $98,000. We no longer could use that money to pay for what we wanted to pay for it. We kept the money, and it'll carry over into another year, but it cannot be used to pay for what it was supposed to pay for. So that hurts the budget $98,000. So you can see that that surplus that we think we might have based on all the guesses that we've made and all the assumptions that we've made can evaporate literally in a 1-minute phone call or a 2-second email from the Department of Education. It comes and goes that fast. Another example is, at the high school one year we had an $80,000 increase in dual enrollment costs. That was unanticipated. A wonderful thing to have happen. More kids signing up for dual enrollment. Karen will tell you, it's great to have those kids involved with dual enrollment, going to college and high school at the same time. However, if a whole bunch of them decide to do it one year, we can't anticipate that, and we could see $80,000 evaporate literally when Karen or Karen call my office. So give me some idea of what's going on with the budget. Any questions on what you see there? So the board has to solve this structural deficit issue of minus $455,582. Actually probably going to be right around $500,000 off, when we start to round. And again, at this point, we're rounding.
I do have a question.
All right. Let me back up.
The one expenditure in adult education.
Got it. Everybody got that right there where that dot is?
Yeah, we talked the other day, you were saying something about the adult education being separate.
Yep. If you
And
look.
then being kind of, but it's included in this. Is it general fund budget or
Yeah.
is it?
Different line items. The two cannot commingle. That's a great question. You can't commingle is the word they use, meaning mix. You can't mix your money from adult ed and in your general fund budget. Yeah, you can't commingle them. We show them in the budget because they're there, see?
Well, that's what was confusing to me, is it's showing here, should it be shown here?
Well, it has to be shown in the budget because when the board ultimately adopts its budget, it includes all of its programs. Not just general fund, but all programs that feed into it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
And they
why,
can be configured, like adult education is